Everybody, welcome to the stream. Today we have with us the economist Ben Harrell, who's going to be chatting to us about the economics profession. This is kind of a follow-up in a way to my recent video called The Toxic Culture of the Economics Profession, or something like that. Ben and I have been chatting for a while. We went from kind of Twitter enemies to Twitter friends. So I thought it would be really great to have him on and finally have a chat with him about these issues. So welcome, Ben. And could you maybe start by just telling us a little bit about like what you do, what your background as an economist and your research and stuff?
Sure. Yeah, no, first of all, yeah, thanks for having me on. We did kind of start as Twitter enemies, and it evolved from there. And I really want to thank you. Like you've really changed the way that I think about some things, and interacting with you has clarified some views and changed others. And so I really appreciate the interactions we've had over the years.
Ditto. And
Yeah,
thank you for being patient with me as well. I used to be a bit more aggy on Twitter. I feel like I've chilled out a bit,
you
partly because
have
of the
chilled out a
influence
bit.
of people like you as well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I used to be a bit aggy on Twitter as well. So I think we smoothed each other's rough edges. But so I am these days, I'm an applied microeconomist. I initially was trained as an experimental economist and behavioral economist, but these days I do mostly applied micro, mostly health stuff. You might be able to see from the sign behind me, I'm a postdoctoral researcher at Vanderbilt University. I have a dual appointment in the Department of Economics and the LGBT Policy Lab. So I do a lot of queer health related research. It's kind of niche, but growing in economics. We just got back from one of the major conferences in Austin a couple days ago, the Association for Public Policy and Management, which is sort of like a field conference, not just for econ, but for public policy, public management programs, things like that. And there was a really big contingent of both queer researchers and researchers who look at queer adjacent topics. So it's a niche field, but it's growing. The American Economics Association has like what's called a pink paper session every year now, where they highlight LGBTQ related research. It's really cool. It's exciting to be part of basically a new subfield in economics, which, may be an offshoot of feminist economics, but you can definitely detect some of the more heterodox influences. For instance, one of the, I guess you could call them co-founders of the field, is Lee Badgett, who's a professor at UMass Amherst, and who is an old school feminist economist. She's really, really cool. But thanks again for having me here. That's a little bit about what I do.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. Say hello. So we have 73 viewers. Only one of them has said something in the chat so far. So say hello, everybody. Don't be shy. Yeah, so LGBTQ economics seems like a really good topic to start this conversation on, because there has been very little. I mean, certainly when I started studying economics in like 2007 or something, and I don't think I'd really heard about it until I started. Yeah. Oh, okay. I just got a lot of hellos. Hello, everybody. That's better. That's much better. So yeah, I hadn't really heard about it, to be honest, like during my studies and even through my PhD, right? Whether somebody called it LGBTQ economics or whether they just said, here's, some analysis that is done on the LGBTQ community, or, here's how they experience economics maybe differently. And so it's just, it's only really been through you that and other people like you that I've learned about it. So could you maybe talk a little bit more about it? Because I'd love to learn more.
Sure. So the sort of the apocryphal story by now is, at the time, my boss, Kit Carpenter, who is a prominent health economist who previously had worked on stuff other than LGBTQ stuff. Like, he was one of the big scholars who originated the literature on alcohol bans and drunk driving, and was very participatory in like the cigarette tax literature. But he and Lee Badgett were sitting across from each other in a cafe at a conference, just sort of bemoaning the fact that there was no real research into LGBTQ populations. And sort of famously, Lee told him, well, it's us, let's do it. And so for the next few years, at the time, I believe Kit was a PhD student at UC Irvine, and Lee was still at UMass Amherst. She's now at the Williams Institute. I think she's on leave at the Williams Institute. But they sort of decided that they were going to forge this. They're going to forge this new path because, especially following the legalization of same-sex marriage in Massachusetts here in the U.S., I think it started to become clear to people that LGBT folks are here. We're not going away. We're going to become increasingly visible. Makes sense that you would want to know, the sort of idiosyncrasies of our economic lives, right? So they took two separate lines of attack. Kit took health, Lee took labor, and together they brought other people along and sort of forged that literature. Lee has some very interesting early work, the first work to look at earnings differentials between same-sex and different sex couples, which was just fascinating. And that was the literature that really brought me into it. And now it's exploded. Every Tuesday, if your listeners are interested and don't mind consuming mainstream econ research, every single Tuesday at noon Eastern time, there is a seminar where we meet, and there's 30 to 40 queer economists, and we share research related to queer populations, give each other feedback and support each other. It's really, really cool. There's a website. You can just Google AEA LGBT and it'll come up, and you can sign up for the seminar series, which is just fantastic.
That sounds great. AEA LGBT
Yep.
seminar. Right. Cool. That sounds really good. I'll have to check it out. So I think I want to learn more about the LGBTQ stuff, to be honest. So you mentioned earnings data, right? So for example, we hear a lot about pay gaps, right? In economics, we hear about the gender pay gap first and foremost. There's also a race pay gap. I've heard less about the pay gap for LGBTQ people, and I think one thing I do know is that trans people in particular have quite alarming rates of poverty. So yeah, could you just shed some light on the stylized facts of those earnings data?
Sure. I want to start out by saying, especially when it comes to transgender folks, there is this is a problem that undergirds the data more broadly. It is exceedingly difficult to count queer people in the US. We do not have the same quality of data that you have in the UK. Or in Europe more broadly. Part of that is oversight, just an oversight issue on the part of our administrators, and some of it is a political choice. There are powerful people in government who do not want LGBTQ people counted, and so we have to do these quite odd things where we infer. A lot of times we infer same-sex couple status by looking at administrative data and matching heads of households with married and unmarried partners who are of the same sex, which is difficult. There's a whole sub-literature in LGBTQ economics about how you make sure that you're not erroneously counting people because of how difficult it is to do that. We're basically completely restricted from researching non-partnered LGBTQ people, or have been until very recently, because you just can't find them in the data. You can't identify them. I'm going to post in the chat a new working paper from my boss, Kit Carpenter. It's the papers, the SSRN, Social Science Research Network link that I posted in the chat.
Nice one.
Yeah, it's using brand new data from the Census Pulse data that tracks labor market and economic outcomes for trans people. The upshot of it is that they are they have much higher poverty rates. They're much less likely, much more likely to report being food insecure, and perhaps also unsurprisingly, these inequities are amplified across intersectional vectors, with like trans people of color having really, really dire outcomes. Now we know a little bit more from previous literature about earnings and employment for lesbian and gay couples, not so much singles, but couples. There is an overall queer penalty. It is, depending on some estimates, it's more pronounced for lesbian couples than for gay couples. Again, you can imagine lesbian couples experiencing discrimination across two vectors, both being women and being sexual minorities. But also, queer people accumulate human capital in just different ways. It's really interesting. They choose different kinds of majors in college. They choose different kinds of jobs relative to their majors. My colleague Mike Martell at Bard College shows that some of that has to do with maybe they're just selecting into to industries that they see as more accepting, oftentimes, unfortunately, which pay less.
Yeah. Okay. Wow. That's really interesting. I mean, so across the board that there is a negative pay gap, right? It's really interesting because I remember because I tried to look this up, right? It's occurred to me there's a gender pay gap, there's a race pay gap, is there like an LGBTQ pay gap? And when I looked it up, what I saw was data that said actually gay men earn more. And I thought, well, number one, you've gone into the problems with what data are there, but I think there's a very obvious sample selection problem there, isn't it? It's like, who are the gay men who are free to express themselves as gay, right? They're the ones who are educated, wealthy, in certain industries. They're not, for example, going to be in more working class settings or more rural settings in the United States, right?
Yeah, it definitely it definitely changes at different steps along the income distribution, because at some point you have to start taking into account wealth and children. But just in general, yeah, there's a queer pay gap.
Yeah.
But
yeah. So I mean it. Well, okay, so I've got one question from chat that I'm going to read out before it disappears. Sure. So you might have seen it. It's the one from Curtis Wackett. So it says, I'll read it out for people who are listening to this like it's a podcast. I'm a bit skeptical of the emancipatory capacity or the point of studying mainstream queer economics when it is divorced entirely from the goals or horizons of queer politics. So I don't know. I don't know if maybe Curtis Wackett, you could maybe elaborate on that a little bit, but did you have any thoughts in the meantime? But now they're worried that we've called them out.
No, yeah, I see that now. No, Curtis, I completely understand. I will not try to make the case that the queer economist looks the same as the queer sociologist, and I can definitely say that because I work in a lab with economists, sociologists, psychologists. We have an affiliate who's make sure I get this right, psycholinguist, which is fascinating. They research the production of the singular they, them pronoun and strategies for engaging your brain in such a way that you remember and get correct people's preferred pronouns, which is fascinating. We have colleagues in the School of Divinity, the law school. So yeah, I definitely don't want to make the case that queer economists are going to look the same. We know the field compared to the other social sciences, and especially the humanities more broadly, is to the right. But I also want to push back a little bit. I interact with a lot of LGBT people, and I would, when you say queer politics, what I assume you mean is queer socialist politics, and I definitely agree that there aren't a ton of economists who engage with queer socialist politics, but queer politics more broadly, we're definitely keyed in on. Like, I publish with sociologists and psychologists. I have a paper I'm working on with a friend of mine who's a historian. So one of the things, in fact, that unlearning has kind of changed my mind on and pushed back on me on, and I largely agree with now, is that we do need much more ideological diversity, and diversity of especially teaching content in economics. So in as much as we're not engaged with a lot of like queer socialist politics, we're definitely engaged with, at least in this subdiscipline, I would say, compared to other subdisciplines in econ, we engage with people outside of our field far more, mainly because econ has been shit at developing this research space. If econ would have was going to research this, develop this research space on its own, it would have done it by now.
Yeah.
So we've required help from our siblings in different disciplines.
I mean,
so I'm
yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So hello, Vorko Segan, by the way. Thanks for joining us on the stream. So yeah, I mean, that is a seamless segue, I think, to like some of the broader issues we were going to discuss, right? And I think it's interesting that I recently, for context, if you just clicked on this video, you don't know who either of us are, what's going on. I recently made a video about the toxic culture of the economics profession. And one of the things that struck me just then, as you were talking, was how some of the issues I raised in the video about lack of diversity in the economics profession, in terms of, demographic diversity, as well as like diversity of ideas and what you call ideological diversity, right? They seem to almost all be part of the same package in some way, right? And I think you're kind of a case study in that, the LGBTQ lab, because you're studying this issue in an area where we haven't seen many LGBT economists in the past, and you're also interdisciplinary, right? So it seems to tend to come together, right? Addressing all of these problems, it's all part of the same battle, I think, to improve economics.
100% agree. Co-authoring with sociologists and psychologists and other non-econ researchers. I co-author a lot with health policy researchers and public health researchers more broadly. Co-authoring and doing the work with those people have made me so much of a better economist. There's a kind of myopia, and I don't think this is unique to economics.
Sure.
I think this is true across the board with every discipline. There's a kind of myopia that comes with being siloed, where you're not trained to think about questions in certain ways. And when you're exposed to different perspectives, it opens a whole new world, and a whole new way of thinking about things, and whole new research questions. Economists are leaving so much on the table by not engaging more with other disciplines, engaging in good faith more with other disciplines. They're leaving so much on the table. Yeah, it is an important point. It is an important point. Oh yeah, I see. I see. The chat is a big fan of interdisciplinary work too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I sort of naturally gravitated towards like an interdisciplinary context as well, and it's just it's just interesting. So to take an obvious example, um, you'd pretty rarely. I don't know if you'd ever have somebody in a mainstream economics department say to you, "Why are you using a quantitative model?" Right, like
Right.
why are you using maths? Right, that's like everyone would
Mhm.
just be like, what? Like what? Everyone, like I can't. I've never heard that said by an economist, right? But if you go to any other social science, somebody's going to
Mhm.
say that. Somebody's going to say like ask you to justify, from kind of some kind of I don't know, epistemological perspective, right? From first principles. Why bother with this quantitative model, right? It makes things
Mhm.
so much more interesting.
No, I completely agree. And for the first time in my professional career, this past week, I had the opportunity to review and discuss descriptive qualitative work, and it was fantastic. So for those of you who don't know how this works for academics at conferences, there are often panels, right? And panels usually have 3 or 4
Mm.
papers centered around the same topic. There's a chair for the panel who keeps time and makes sure that everything runs smoothly. Then there are the researchers who present their work, and then there are discussants. And discussants review the work. It's like providing peer review in person to the entire panel.
Yeah.
Um, and I had the opportunity to review some really fascinating qualitative, descriptive work. I think I may have neglected to mention this earlier, but 2 of my primary areas of interest within LGBTQ economics and just in health economics more broadly is sexual and mental health. Those are sort of my 2 big areas. And this person um, was conducting interviews with every level of administration and service delivery at the like local health department level about this one particular kind of um, uh, sexual health policy called expedited partner treatment. Basically, the idea is if you go into the health department, you test positive for an STI. There are these new um, there's this new policy called expedited partner treatment, where in some cases the clinician will just give you an extra prescription for the antibiotic you take to clear up the STI, or they'll just give you extra pills. The problem is while this kind of treatment is quite effective in preventing the spread of STIs, it remains unpopular. Like people don't do it, people won't use it, and so uh, whereas an economist might just or a quant person might just say, oh, there's no effect of this policy on
Mm.
STI, so it was an ineffective policy. This person actually took the time to look behind the curtain and speak to the people responsible for um, delivering this kind of treatment and found some really fascinating
What a crazy
barriers that
idea.
they face. Yeah, exactly. I know, right? Um, yeah, it was wild. There's some really cool stuff that they uncovered, and having the opportunity to discuss that work just got my brain turning about all the times that I've been running a regression and I've seen a null effect on a policy and thought, well, I thought for sure there would be an effect from that policy, but I didn't have the institutional knowledge, the deep
Mm.
institutional knowledge, to rule out that it could have just been a problem with delivery, which I think is important.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, like the it reminds me of an example I used in the video, right, which was about harm reduction in
Yes,
opioid
yes,
addiction,
yes.
where a team of economists basically used all their rigorous causal inference methods. And economists are very good at rigorous causal inference. There's no 2 ways about it.
Mhm.
They know the statistics probably better than other social scientists. I would even go so far as to say. unfortunately, they're very much run the numbers bunch economists. So they get a metric that they can, and they run their their difference in differences estimator or whatever they're trying to use. They run that, and then they say, well, maybe there's no effect, maybe there's a negative, maybe there's a positive effect, and that's kind of it. And the whole focus is on the statistics, right? And what they did in this instance, I think, was they showed that one of the harm reduction policies, I think it was treatment with naloxone.
It was,
Doliacatal. I think they showed that backfired. Right, that was their main thesis. It backfires, and economists love doing that, don't they? They're like, "Oh, wait a minute, this thing that you thought looked good, no, actually, it's really bad."
But what if good thing bad?
Yeah, exactly. That's basically, economics for the past 50 years. Summed up. But so economists like doing that, but then what the public health experts said was, well, okay, first, we think that this is good, and there's like hundreds of papers and reviews on it. So like, why does your result contradict ours? But more specifically, what you've done is, firstly, you've looked at the policy of harm reduction, naloxone treatment being passed. You haven't shown that it's actually put into practice, right? So it's one thing to pass a policy, but are the people actually doing it? Like, you can pass a policy somewhere, it can be in law, but there are all sorts of laws that don't get enforced, and all sorts of policies which actually don't have a bite. The minimum wage, for example, can be in law, but not actually enforced, right? Something like that. So in this case, harm reduction wasn't necessarily being enforced, and also they didn't actually use data on usage. They used like Google searches and arrests, which are just like very fleeting proxies, right? And so that's a good example. Exactly what I forget their name, but exactly what your person did was said, well, okay, let's look under the hood here. Let's go out and, God forbid, talk to some people and find out what's going on. Because if the economists had done that in this instance, they might have realized that the policy wasn't really being enforced, or people were searching for naloxone, but that didn't mean they were using it. Any number of things.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that's true, and I think economists are so used to writing for economics economics audiences that they don't often think through the implications of what they're saying, because what sounds good to an economics audience may sound, sociopathic to just like a general audience. And to be fair, I know Jen Doliak. She is a very warm and wonderful person who, as you rightfully have pointed out, is absolutely committed to getting more women involved into economics. I think that was just a public communications failure on her part. And economists, and really social scientists more broadly, have to be thoughtful about how they frame the results of their research. So, for instance, similar situation. I'm going to give you a preview of some work I have forthcoming that we're circulating right now. So there's a
world first.
This is a world first.
Excellent.
I haven't discussed this.
Only on Unlearning Economics.
Oh, yeah. You heard it first on Unlearning Economics. There's a drug called, a class of drugs called PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis. In the US, they're sold under the product names Truvada and Descovy. This drug is it makes you effectively immune to HIV. You take a pill a day and you're immune to HIV. However, it is extremely expensive. It costs about $2,000 a month without health insurance. With health insurance, many health insurance schemes have copays that are quite high. And so one of our public health insurance programs here in the US called Medicaid covers this drug. And so we, as some of your audience may know, starting in, between 2010 up till now, we had a series of public health insurance expansions that were the decision of individual states. Individual states could choose whether or not they chose to expand these public health insurance programs. And so my research colleagues and I thought, oh, well, the public health insurance program covers this drug. A lot of, new HIV infections happen in the context of young, uninsured, poor young men who have sex with men. Surely these public health insurance expansions had an effect on HIV, right? Turns out they do. They pretty dramatically reduce HIV. And, we tie that to this particular drug through some additional analyses. But one additional thing we found is that there was a very slight uptick in some cases, in some context, of like chlamydia and gonorrhea, which are less severe STIs. Now, a traditionally trained economist would hone in on those results and call them moral hazard, right?
Yeah.
That would be, hey, look, all these people who aren't getting HIV anymore, that's great. But you know what they are getting? Chlamydia and it costs, public health experts say that it costs about as much as a box of pencils to treat gonorrhea and chlamydia. It's just very simple, standard antibiotics that you give, as opposed to HIV, which you have for the rest of your life. And it is extremely cost prohibitive to treat. But we wanted to be very careful about how we're framing those results. And so we're not going to call that moral hazard, for one, because we don't want to inspire the ire of the Twitter crowd, but also descriptively, it's still an interesting health economics behavior. The exchange of an incurable STI for a curable one is fascinating to me. And I think is fascinating to people more broadly.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely fascinating. And I think, the issues over how to frame things, you've obviously framed it carefully, right? And but economists could reasonably be accused of not doing that, of phrasing it provocatively.
Quite so. Yeah. I don't know why economists are simultaneously, this is not a shot at my profession because I love being an economist. I love working with other economists, but economists are not known for being the most exciting people, kind of boring and circumspect, but they love an inflammatory finding. Just love it. It's their job.
Yeah, it's really curious. I don't know when it happened. I kind of blame Freakonomics a little bit.
Oh God, yes, yes, I blame them too.
They just abortion reduces crime. Then in super Freakonomics, global warming, isn't really a big deal. They just, I don't know. They just they loved that story, and I think. I don't know if it was true before then. I feel like it was less true, but then I think you do have a lot of economists, knowingly or unknowingly, doing that kind of Freakonomics thing. Like, oh, wait a minute, it's counterintuitive. Like we said earlier, good thing, bad, Yeah.
Right, exactly. I think to a certain extent, that is a publication effect. You need something to differentiate yourself. And you talked about this with the curse of the top five, or the tyranny of the top five. We have a paper, some co-authors of I have a paper right now that we're polishing to send to a top five. And I have had more discussions about how to structure and organize the paper and how to pitch the paper so that it is suitable for a top five. Then we have about, the results, the analysis, and making sure everything is robust. I'm not saying all of those things are wrong. If you're going to be a working economist, you have to think about those things. If you want to publish well, you have to think about them. But the time use, the irony of the time use is not lost on me. It is quite strange. And that is training that I never got. so this is an interesting, to appeal to your previous video and the EGMR classifications. I did my PhD at Georgia State, which would qualify me as a very low ranked monkey. And I am now doing a postdoc at a top 30 school, which would, with, you know, a couple papers under review at like top field journals, and the possibility of some top fives down the road, which makes me like a mid-ranked monkey, right? So, so that is training that I never got at Georgia State, but it is training that I've gotten here, and I've gotten sort of incidentally from co-authors at higher ranked schools. So it's interesting that is a form of human capital development that you develop at higher ranked programs that you don't in lower ranked programs.
Yeah, it's interesting. You've escaped. So that means you've escaped the low ranked monk. You've escaped inceldom, basically. Like it's why economics inceldom.
Can I cuss on here? Like
yeah. So what you want.
It's why these fuckers hate me. Like if you've seen like if you search for me on EJMR, there's some vile stuff on there. These fuckers hate me.
Oh, I don't want to, Ben. I mean, you search me as well. There's some pretty bad stuff, but yeah. But the difference is that mine won't be homophobic, whereas I expect you've got that extra.
Yeah. No, it's really disgusting. So. In 2019, maybe 2018. No, it was early 2019. The American Economic Association meetings were in Atlanta, which is where I was doing my PhD. So I organized. There are three PhD granting economics PhD granting universities in Atlanta, and so I coordinated with all the grad students at those universities, and we set up like a house share kind of thing where you didn't have to stay at a hotel. You could like couch surf, or if we had extra bedrooms, you could crash in our extra bedrooms. You've been a grad student, you know how expensive it is to travel to conferences.
So can I just I want you to carry on with this story very much, but just to interject on what the economics job market is like for people.
Oh, right.
So you very much, basically you send off, I don't know, however many applications. One guy in my department sent off 450, I think. I was close. I was close to 100. What did you send off?
I sent off 175, 12 of which converted to interviews. Yeah. 4 of which converted to offers.
Right. That's pretty good going, actually, to be honest. Like, yeah.
It was a rough year,
yeah. By that I mean it's good going, but for someone outside of economics, they'd be like, "Oh my god, that's horrible." So, there are much worse stories. But anyway, yeah. So usually 3 figures applications, I think, is pretty normal, right? And, and then what you have is like rounds of interviews, and the first round is at several conferences. The main one in America, at the ASSA, American Social Sciences Association. Have I got that right?
Allied.
Okay, yeah, Allied Social. Yeah, sorry. Anyway, so basically, all of the universities go there. There's a whole load of applicants. You have these kind of quick interviews, right? The 15 minutes, I think, right? They're 15 minutes long, maybe half an hour at the longest. So, and it's just chaining, and it's this really intense process. You have to go from one hotel to another. I remember one of my the faculty in my department saying that he had to take his shoes off and run between them. It's this really horrible, very just anti-humanistic process that awful. Just is this basically how economists would design a job market, right? A horribly efficient machine with absolutely no regard for the people within it. Also, they're in hotel rooms. I mentioned this in the video. Very few female economists. The ones that are there get to go to hotel rooms full of old men and sit on their beds and get interviewed by them. And obviously there have been some reports of comments. So basically the economics job market is pretty horrible, especially if you're a woman or perhaps a member of another minority. And this is the setting in which Ben said to people, okay, you're coming over to this horrible thing, but we're going to give you free accommodation, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right, yeah. Because it is extremely expensive to stay at some of these conferences, and not all programs have the funding to cover travel. I know that's probably common in the UK for your department to cover your travel. It is quite uncommon in the US for your department to cover your travel. For instance, this conference that I just got back from, I'll be reimbursed for, but all said and done, I had to put up about $1,500. I had to pay that in advance on my own. I'll get reimbursed for it, which is fine. I have a nice job, but if I were a grad student and tried to do that, it would be terrible. So let's say you're staying at a conference hotel for 3 nights, and it's not unusual for the conference hotel rate to be, between 200 and 300 US dollars. It could be quite expensive. So we organized this housing share where, and we had like 35, 36 graduate students from all over the world. I met my good friend, Dr. Mark Fabian, who has the Apodstomology podcast that you all should check out.
Okay, that sounds good.
Who I met, who he was my housing share. He introduced me to port wine, which I'd never had before, which was exciting.
You'd never had port wine before?
I had never had. I grew up in rural South Georgia.
Okay.
I don't think you understand.
Okay, I thought you're right. I don't understand. But anyway, let's not get sidetracked by port wine.
Yeah. So I did this, and I posted, and we organized via Twitter. And EJMR immediately, their immediate response to this was, "Oh, don't stay with that guy unless you want to wake up with a sore bum," implying that I would sexually assault my house guest, which is, just wonderful to hear. And no one organizes this kind of stuff for thanks or accolades or whatever, but it's lovely to hear as a form of thanks for your public good contribution to the profession. I think you at least
deserve not to be insulted, and especially in a homophobic way, for organising. Probably one of the nicer things I've seen happen in the economics job market. I remember that happening on Twitter, and I thought, oh, that's really nice. But of course, if you're on EJMR, then the first call is to go for some kind of stupid homophobic joke.
Stupid, right?
Yeah.
The not the, what is it Donald Trump said? They're not sending their best people to EJMR. That's for sure. No, it was actually kind of sad in a way, because I don't want to psychoanalyze anyone, but it struck me that that it was so hard for these people on this message board to conceive of a world where people would give each other mutual aid just out of like unconditional positive regard, rather than to have some like a creepy sexual ulterior motive, which I think is kind of like a sad state for them to live in, that they can't imagine that kind of like kindness that you would just share with someone because they're human and a fellow economist.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it gets into this this kind of incel mindset, right? I think, which is the kind of, it's us against the world, but also we hate ourselves and each other as well. So really, it's me against the world, but I hate myself. So it's like, it's just only negative mindsets in such a competitive environment as the economics job market. You've got however many applications hundreds of applications per place, a lot of extremely adept, intelligent, hardworking people who you're competing with. They have had their brains poisoned, and they literally cannot imagine that you might help each other out, and so they fall back on bigotry. Right.
Quite sad.
It
truly is.
It is pathetic. I mean, I think so. Yeah, we're sort of naturally discussing all of the topics in the video, but I did want to mention. So we've actually discussed this. So this, just again, a bit of background. You don't know what's going on, who we are. You've just clicked on this. We're talking about the economics profession. The economics profession, one of our great shames, perhaps, is the forum known as Economics Job Market Rumors, which is an anonymous forum that's designed for economics grad students, basically, to find out stuff about jobs, but it's turned into some combination of 4chan and the incel forums. Basically, it's just horrible. There's lots of misogyny, just lots of toxicity. So that's what we're talking about. Now, I remember mentioning to you some of my main ideas for this video like a while ago. In fact, maybe 2 years ago, because I had the idea for this video for a while, and I mentioned the comparison of EJMR to incels, and then you maybe
stole it
a year ago
liberated it. I expropriated it.
No, see, my yeah, you did.
It's okay, you can say it.
Standard mainstream economist. No, it was.
I admit to it.
No, it was no. But what you did was actually add some meat to it, meat to the bones. Because all I thought was, well, that's a forum full of very sad people on the internet who are misogynistic and toxic, and that seems quite a lot like the incel forums. But you actually came up with this whole like red pill theory of economics, because you had this thread which I referenced in the video, right? And by the way, everybody, Ben read through a draft of the script of this video, and I'm very thankful for that because it was really helpful. But I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit through that, and not just in the context of EJMR, which I actually don't care about them that much, but just the broader context that how the profession creates this,
Yeah. So if you look in the original tweet, I do acknowledge you there at the end, but that was only after you DM'd me and reminded me that we had this conversation like a year before. So I thought this had all, in true economist form, I thought it had, I was very much brain cell and sitting on a sofa made of my own gray matter.
Oh, yeah.
It had emerged naturally from my, what's the Reddit meme? In this moment, I'm euphoric because I'm enlightened by my own intelligence. It was a euphoric moment. But no, so this idea is like really informed by the conversation we had. Because I think we started having that conversation when Natalie Wynn released her incels video, right?
Yeah.
ContraPoints, if you don't watch the YouTube channel, you absolutely should, even though it's like,
I'd be curious as to anybody who watches my channel who doesn't watch ContraPoints.
Does not watch ContraPoints.
What is the Venn diagram there? There's maybe one dude in it who thinks that I'm playing Elden Ring and just wanted to watch that.
Exactly. So there's this old joke. For those of you who are unfamiliar with how you get into economics PhD programs and sort of if you think the economics job market is regimented, you should see the economics PhD market. The old joke is that you actually have to have a PhD in economics in order to get a PhD in economics. For instance, we have an undergrad in the lab right now who's extremely accomplished, double major in public policy and math, will leave undergrad with 4 publications, not solo authored, but co-authors. 4 co-authored publications, 2 of which will be economics papers, will have had PhD level economics courses, will have glowing letters of recommendation from some of the top economists in the country, and still may not get into a top 5 program. Yeah. So it's insane. And so there's a lot you have to get right in order to get into a top ranking economics program, which basically opens all the doors for you, right? If you get into one of these programs, all the doors are open to you. And so if you don't know quite early that you want to do an economics PhD, then there's a high chance that you will not acquire all the classes and training that you need to get one. Sort of concurrent with this, I believe Amanda Agan, who has a tweet right now about a new NBER working paper. She has National Bureau of Economic Research working paper she has that shows economics has some of the lowest socioeconomic diversity among the social sciences. Yeah. So for instance, my mother never graduated high school and was a high school lunch lady. She served food in the high school cafeteria. My dad did graduate high school, never graduated from college, and like worked at a sawmill. He was like a factory guy. I was the first person in my family to graduate from college. I grew up working class. Like there was no one in my program, even the students who came from different countries, who had the same kind of working class background I did. Everyone, either their parents were PhDs or MAs or independently wealthy. So there were a lot of barriers for me in getting into econ PhD, which made me very aware of all of, like, you have to know this stuff early. And so I never had the expectation of getting into a top program. But for a lot of these guys, especially the guys on EJMR, who did well in their undergrad programs, maybe they had a good undergraduate thesis. They got really interested in economics research. Maybe they independently read economics blogs and Reddit and Twitter. When they don't get into these top programs, they feel as though they're denied something that they've earned, right? And it's not just that they were denied a place, that they're being denied a future. Because they've bought into this lie that where you do your program is your destiny, right? And in some ways, it is, in that different rankings of programs have access to different qualities of networks and training. But I went to Georgia State is currently ranked, I believe, 16. It just fell pretty dramatically in the rankings. I think it's between 65 and 69 out of the 100 top ranked programs in the US. I mean, I went to a low ranked school, but I placed pretty well. And I did that based on the quality of my work and the quality of my networks. And these folks don't see a path forward like that, I don't think, because there's, again, I don't want to psychoanalyze or blame them too much, because in a lot of ways, they're victims of the same kind of system that you talk about all the time. But instead of viewing themselves as, what is it that I think it was John Steinbeck said that socialism never caught on in the U.S. Because everyone in the U.S. sees themselves as temporarily embarrassed millionaires and not the oppressed underclass. It's sort of the same in EJMR. I think instead of seeing themselves as the oppressed underclass of a extremely hierarchical system, they see themselves as temporarily embarrassed high-ranked monkeys.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, temporarily embarrassed Nobel Prize winners. Absolutely. It's really well put. I think it's just it's difficult to overstate how competitive it actually is. I mean, somebody in the chat said, and by the way, we've had a few people say they watch ContraPoints, but not. Sorry, they watch me, but not ContraPoints. So there's some. But what I'm interested in, are there any people who watch me who don't know who ContraPoints is? That was the question actually. But anyway, more importantly, the question of like who succeeds and how that happens is, I think it's a kind of fascinating one, and I guess it's kind of arbitrary in some ways, right? Like, who gets to the very top? I mean, you just said, like, you can have top marks, you can even have publications and not get into one of these top things. And somebody in chat said, how the hell do you do it then? Like, how do you do it?
It's a black box. It's a completely black box. I am increasingly learning. So one thing that I have learned going from a very low ranked school to a top 30 school is that the quality of networks that you have access to is dramatically different. So my boss is the director of the NBER, the National Bureau of Economic Research, Health Economics program. And so I now get invited to things like the NBER Summer Institute, which, has its own sort of reputation. It's invite only, kind of like this prestigious thing where we all present our research to each other, and we get this really high quality feedback and research support. But not everyone gets invited to that. Not everyone has an equal chance to get into that. It has to do with your connections and your network. Now, for some people, networking comes quite naturally. Something that I've learned about being an extrovert in the economics profession is having the bare minimum of social skills is like a fucking superpower. The ability to talk to another human being without drooling or tripping over your own feet can like get you a job. It's incredible. I've never encountered anything like that. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
I think, are you saying this within the economics profession, right? Like,
yes,
just because
especially in the
social
economics
skills
profession
are so lacking. Like, I mean, I almost put a comment about it in the video about social skills and stuff, because I'm a pretty awkward guy. Like I think I'm can be a bit blunt and all the rest of it, but like compared to most economists, I am honestly just like the most charming guy in the department. And
you're a Chad.
Yeah, I am a Chad. Yeah, and it's like in most other contexts, right? I'm like the least charming person with the worst social skills, right? But in an economics department, like it's astonishing. And yeah, absolutely. Like if you just like know how to be nice, I don't even know how to put it. It's almost not worth stating because it seems like something that everybody should be able to do. But if you just like are friendly with everybody, then you create a lot of networks, right? And obviously that's, the point stands that it matters where you are in the first place. You can't,
for sure. Yeah.
You can't engineer it out of nothing, but networks, their importance should just not be overstated, I think. And that of course goes against the kind of most conventional mainstream economics explanations, which, I mean, I think Joan Robinson once commented that the marginal productivity doctrine, which, depending on how you interpret it, says that you're paid what you're worth, was immensely comforting to economists, of course, because like, we're the best, we're paid the most because we're the best, and the best economists are paid the most because they're the best. But if you look at things like sociology, where they're more focused on things like networks, right, they would have an entirely different explanation as well.
Yeah, I think the secret sauce for economics is when you can mix being both having the same the social skills that we were just talking about and being competent, and that's what really pushes you over the edge. And I know I keep bringing him up, but the example that I think about is my boss, who is just a very warm and funny person, but also a brilliant economist. This is how I knew I was in the right place. When I looked at his CV and it was like 14 pages long and had, I don't believe, any top fives. And yet he is at the absolute peak of his career in this subfield because he is both competent and warm.
Yeah, absolutely. You can really like outperform your publications, and I expect the EJMR people don't see it that way, and they wouldn't necessarily think, well, maybe I should be friendly to the people around me, be more open-minded, not be a homophobic prick, and all the rest of it. But that obviously wouldn't occur to not just the EJMR lot, but a lot of people in our profession. They just be like, well, I've got to do another problem set. I've got to work through this paper. I've got to publish this. And
some people say that is, it should only be based on, how good you are at your problem sets, or how, good your third year paper is, or whether or not, whether to cluster your standard errors correctly and things like that. And obviously those things are important. and rise to the level of determining, how competent you are. But also, no one wants to work with an asshole. So whenever you're going to be a professor, your only job is not to pump out research papers. Your job is to be a good colleague to your coworkers. Your job is to be a good teacher to your students. Your job is to do the service that's required of you by your university. And I think a lot of these folks have the wrong idea of what's required to be a good economist. I think of this one guy in particular who, if you follow the sort of EJMR drama and the overflow of it onto Reddit, I'm not gonna say his name, but you probably already know who I'm talking about. It's like the prominent EJMR troll, the only one who has like doxed themselves publicly. But he and I had some interactions via DM back when he was on the economics PhD market. And this is why I say so strongly that like the really virulent voices on EJMR don't start this way. It's a slow burn. They get there, they're sort of radicalized into this stuff. We started out having conversations via DM, and I tried to offer him help on his like application materials. And we were talking about how he asked me how much I thought his past as an EJMR troll would hurt him. And I said, I'm not going to lie, it doesn't look good, but you can get ahead of this by disavowing all of this stuff, having a really strong statement on diversity and inclusion, and really working hard to sort of disavow yourself of that that reputation that you had accrued. And he said something really sad. Well, I thought it was really sad. And he said that it wasn't possible for him. He had invested too much into that troll persona. And that, he was getting some of the affirmation he needed from that persona. And I found that really tragic, because we could be providing that affirmation within the field of economics. There's something really powerful about seeing something in people who are interested in studying economics, seeing potential even through the like rough spots and the imperfections, and pulling that out of them. That's one of my favorite parts about being a teacher, is seeing things in my students that they don't yet see in themselves, and giving them the tools they need to pull that out of themselves. And I don't think you have something like EJMR without the moral failing of economics to appropriately affirm and lift up its students, in creating these toxic hierarchical structures where we incentivize this descent into absolute madness. This person, after they had a very difficult time on the PhD market, descended into madness, true madness. And it was hard to watch, and it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, that was extremely poignantly put. I was sort of trying to take it all in. I mean, I didn't actually know that about that particular EJMR troll. I do know who you're talking about. I won't name them because I don't want to. But yeah, I mean, they bought into the persona so much that there's no escape, and there's no. I mean, it's interesting. I do remember. I mean, if you're a kind of top researcher, you'll probably get some kudos. Like, I think I've had a couple of compliments on, but I'm not a top researcher, by the way, but I've had a couple of compliments on like a presentation I've given, here or there. But I think if I remember, because I've done some work for the private sector, and I did this big project with them, and there was so much, firstly, feedback, just feedback of one type or another, right? Continual, clear, which is something that I don't think you get in economics and academia. Maybe in general, it's quite, you spend years writing a paper and then you send it to a journal and it gets rejected, and it's all quite amorphous. There's no real official feedback, and progress updates are kind of sporadic, right? And it's not very well managed. But I just had a bunch of people say from the private sector, how nice it had been working with me and that I'd done a really good job. And I just thought to myself, I think I tweeted about it because I was so surprised. I was like,
I think you did, yeah.
I was like, I don't think anybody's ever said that to me in academia. Like, oh, you've done a really good job. Well done. Like, I just, because I don't know, because like it goes back to social skills and there's too many men and I don't know, too much masculinity, I should say, actually, to be honest, to be more precise.
Right.
And like, yeah, I just think there's just a real gap of like support networks, and it's basic in a way. It's so basic, isn't it? I don't even know how to say it because it's so basic. Like, be nice to each other. And I mean, we had with my opening, and closing for the video was like the 4 high-profile suicides, right?
Yeah.
In the discipline. So we had in 2019, it was Martin Weitzman. In later that year, I think. No, wait. Earlier that year, it had been Alan Kruger, I think.
It was Alan Kruger.
Alan Kruger, yeah. Then we had the next year Emmanuel Fahy, and then William Sandholm. And they were all high profile suicides within the profession. And like I said in the video, suicide, it happens for a lot of reasons. You don't want to attribute it to any one thing, but right. With Weitzman it was really interesting because he just narrowly missed out on the Nobel Prize, and the Swedish committee's decision not to include him with Nordhaus, by the way, was bizarre. Absolutely
strange,
absolutely
really
bizarre.
Weird,
really odd. Like,
yeah,
I don't understand. You don't include economists from 2 different fields together typically. So they included William Nordhaus, another climate change economist like Weitzman, with Paul Romer, who's a macroeconomist, right? Maybe deserving of a Nobel, Paul Romer, but just not that year.
Not that year, yeah.
And Weitzman basically just started to, partly because of missing out on the Nobel, started to doubt his own abilities. And they said, the New York Times article about it said there was like, someone corrected a mistake in his paper and he became despondent. And it's like, what kind of environment have we created where somebody's saying, hey, you've made a mistake? Yeah. Especially when Weitzman, the top of the profession, right? He came up with so many, he's got great papers, like so many great ideas. When that is enough to just like to maybe tip you over the edge, I just think we've created such a horrible environment within the profession.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to what you were talking about in the video about seminar culture in economics. And I find myself stepping into this role, and I'm still trying to not do it so much, but in econ, there's a posture that you take, I think, when reviewing both your own work and the work of others, where you start from the position that there is a critical flaw in this paper, you've just not found it yet. And you go looking for the critical flaw. Whereas I've presented work in a lot of interdisciplinary spaces, and the feedback is always framed from the place of what would make this paper better. It starts from the position of the paper's good, but what could make it better? And I think that difference in posture and perspective is driving a lot of this stuff, because to find that there was an error in your paper means that you didn't appropriately orient yourself as an economist. You're a bad economist. Not that you're a researcher who can't possibly know everything. And so for someone to point out something that maybe isn't, or even is in your area of expertise, and you've overlooked it, is seen as like a critical failure. And that's a that's a real shame. I'm trying to get better about that. Do you agree? Do you see that in maybe some in our cultures different in the UK?
No, I mean, I think as well it's kind of epitomized by the fact that most disciplines and most presentations in the world outside of the economics profession will have people ask questions at the end, right? Whereas
Yeah,
in an economics seminar, you can barely start. You can do the fucking like title slide. I'm not, and this is not an exaggeration, right? Not in
not
the
at all.
slightest.
Not at
You will
all.
have someone. So basically, what so you do difference and differences and blah blah blah. But did you think about this? Where did you get that? It's like, oh my god, I haven't even begun yet. Like, what are you trying to prove? Well, I know what you're trying to prove with your stupid, incessant questions. But like, so
Yes.
yeah, it's the same thing, right? I'm looking for the problem. I found the problem. Your research is shit. I'm great. Fuck you. I'm a better economist, right?
And I think for most economists internally, they think that they're coming from a good place, because for most people, there's a dual incentive there, right? The incentive is to both look smart and to help the person that you're presenting. But obviously, looking smart might overwhelm some of that stuff. But like, one thing that has been especially helpful here at Vanderbilt, and I know some other schools do this here, but there's sort of a departmental norm where we have something called the 15-minute rule. It depends on the level of presentation. So for like grad student presentations, it's a little bit shorter. So I think it's like a 5-minute rule. But for like invited speakers, there's a 15-minute rule. You have to give them 15 uninterrupted minutes to talk about their project before you start asking substantive questions. You can ask clarifying questions like, what do you mean when you say X? Or something like that. But substantive questions have to be held until at least 15 minutes. Yeah, I remember. So I came from psychology. My undergraduate background was psychology. And I remember attending my first economics seminar and being so angry and so uncomfortable that I had to leave. I couldn't physically stay. It just felt awkward. It wasn't bad. They weren't being mean, but for someone who had never been exposed to that norm before, it was jarring. It was really weird. Eventually I got used to it. But people shouldn't have to. It shouldn't feel like an interrogation to present your research. So yeah, we need to do a lot better about fixing our seminar culture. Especially here in the US, where it's just god awful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it sounds like it might be worse in the US as well than it is in the UK. But like, yeah, we have plenty of it. I mean, I've seen faculty scream at PhD students. It's just like, what are you doing? Like, chill out. I don't know. It's just, yeah, it really is terrible. I mean, so I wanted to circle back a little bit to something which is related to this whole conversation, which is like teaching, right?
Sure.
So you were just talking about, encouraging people, and I think teaching is a big part of that, right?
Sure.
Knowing, as you put it, knowing, seeing something in your students that they don't see, and I do feel that. With all the focus on research that we've been talking about, the focus on getting published in really good journals, trying to basically being a research-led economist, I think is kind of the holy grail, right? If you've got good research, then you're the best of the best, right? And
right.
I've heard somebody refer to a teaching-only contract as a fate worse than death. And I think there was that blog post / Twitter thread from a guy not too long ago where he was talking about how he just teaches and does research on teaching, right? And he says he felt uncomfortable calling himself an economist. He didn't feel like a real economist. Do you remember that?
I do. Was that James Tierney?
Maybe.
Yeah.
He has a Substack, I think, and he put it into a blog post for me. It was really interesting because I've always been interested in economics teaching, And to be honest, I mean, this is a bit sad, really. I think if we didn't have the incentives we have within the profession, I would probably just teach and research into like teaching related things. But because we have the incentives we do, I do a bunch of papers on some things I'm vaguely interested in, but not really, just because that's what I need to do, right, to actually have a job and keep a job, which is sad. So I completely agree with that. But we just don't reward teaching. We don't train economists to be teachers. That, you know, it's just, and I don't think economists really value it as well, like as a whole, right?
In fact, I think it's a negative. I was very fortunate at Georgia State. We both had pedagogical training, and we were given opportunities after passing our qualifying exams to be not TAs or teaching assistants, but actual instructors of record for our courses. And I taught 5 times at Georgia State. And the advice I was given was that was far too much. I was sending bad signals to schools that I cared more about teaching than research, and that would be the kiss of death.
Oh my God.
There is a contempt for teaching that is in economics that I don't think a lot of working economists are willing to acknowledge. Teaching is immensely undervalued. It is my current. So I have lots of work under review right now, but my only publication is actually an economics of education, economic education article. So like my only published work right now is pedagogical in nature. But yeah, I'm with you on that. It's so strange. Like I definitely think teaching and research are complements, not substitutes. Teaching introductory economics courses made me a better economist. Teaching field courses made me a better economist. Co-authoring with students is made. I don't mean to keep harping on my boss, who is just incredible and the best boss I've ever had in my life. But one of the things that made me be like, oh my God, this guy is a badass, is that he co-authors with not just PhD students, he co-authors with undergrads. He gets them involved in the research process. And some of the most rewarding work I've ever done was with undergraduates, getting them involved in the research process. I remember teaching an undergrad over a summer how to do basic econometrics, which is basically all you need for experiments, since randomization takes care of the causal inference thing. But teaching an undergraduate how to do econometrics with the data from our actual experiment in Stata, just showing them how to write simple code and do simple analyses and, you know, code up descriptive statistics tables. And it was so rewarding. I learned a lot. They learned a lot. It made me a better researcher. And again, economists are just leaving a lot on the table by perpetuating this really shitty attitude toward teaching.
Yeah. Luna Fox says, I'm an undergrad who's gotten to co-author, not in economics, but in other research, and it's a really cool and great experience. Yeah,
good
it's like,
you,
I mean,
that's great.
It's excellent. So it's just that it's not only is it obviously good that we should teach in itself, right? Because we're at fucking universities, right? At the end of the day, right? Like, you were a student once. Like, who do you think keeps the university going? Who do you think funds the university? You are first and foremost a teacher, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, research is part of it for sure, but I think your primary duty is to be honest teaching, and yet it's not valued. We don't actually get trained in it very well, which is more of a structural problem, I think. Like that, there's very little. I mean, my friend's mum is a primary school teacher, and she always just says, like, lecturers, and this isn't unique to economics, by the way, lecturers, they're not taught how to teach. Like, why are they expected to teach? And it's higher education. It's called higher education. So there's
Yeah.
nothing higher about it if the person who's doing it doesn't know how to interact with people or communicate ideas properly. They might be the best researcher in the world, but they don't have those skills. So yeah, there's that aspect of it. We should be valuing teaching, but also, like you just said, there's no. It's not like it's a false choice, right? There's obviously symbiosis between the two, right? There's a positive feedback loop. If you do teaching, then you get undergraduates involved or you get PhD students involved. You write research with them. Teaching can clarify your thinking about things. You will always learn something if you teach a course, even if it's on Econ 101, right? You will always learn something. I guarantee it. Every single time you'll be like, oh, right, okay, well that's how that works. Now I actually really get that, right?
Mhm.
It just amazes me that we don't value it. And I mean, you said there's a kind of contempt for teaching, right? My equalizer, my little speech bubbles thing. One of these days, I'm going to get it to work properly. Yeah. Oh, there we go. So, I mean, I've been part of this kind of campaign to push for changes in economics education for a long time. Going back to when I was an undergraduate, we kind of started this campaign. And one of the responses that we tended to get, which I always found it was unconvincing and almost a bit of a cell phone, was like, oh yeah, well, all the problems you're raising. So we'd raise problems about, it's overly theoretical, it's too abstract,
Mhm.
we're not engaging with problems in the real world. It's all very samey. We're learning utility maximization mathematics again and again and again, blah blah blah. What we get is, oh well, that's just undergraduate economics. That's just undergraduate
Mhm.
economics. Research is fine, and so therefore your critique doesn't apply. And it's like that separating line that you've just made between, oh, that's just what we teach the overwhelming majority of our students, and we don't care about that, and that's also somehow separate to what we research, I think is
Yeah.
really emblematic of what you were talking about, right? Because it's like, that's just
Mhm.
teaching. We'll just leave that over there. Yeah, it's a bit rubbish. Maybe we can improve it. But the research that we're doing, which by the way nobody really reads except us, that's really great. So I think it just speaks to your point, right? Sorry, I went on for quite a while
No, no, no,
there.
no. This is actually an area that you have moved the needle for me, because I used to be one of those people, back before I actually started teaching, and we had discussions about that, and there are there are certain things that you can't get into without an appropriate level of prerequisites. However, you absolutely can get undergraduate students engaged with economics research at a high level. It makes their experience in class better and improves their retention. I have a paper on this with some co-authors from Tulane University, where we specifically look at the context of controversial topics in economics, like immigration, like the minimum wage, like racial concordance and healthcare markets, and the list goes on and on. And we use this approach called the Jigsaw Literature Review, where we get papers together that show different aspects of the economics literature on a subject. So, for instance, for the minimum wage, we'll give them a David Newmark paper and an Aaron Dubé paper. Like
Yeah.
one sort of minimum wage has effects on labor markets, one minimum wage doesn't have effects on labor markets, and then we'll give them a paper that sort of synthesizes the literature. And the goal for them is to see the literature and synthesize new ideas about what they think about a policy based on existing research, existing literature, and to be able to speak intelligently about the limitations of that research. They don't have to. So, for instance, you don't have to have an econometrics background to see the limitations of a particular research design, right? Like those sorts of things. Competent students who have had training in the scientific method, they can think through those things. And we can teach them to think through those things. And they get much more connected to the material than if we just, throw up a model of perfect competition on the board and be like, minimum wage decreases labor supply. See here, I show it in this graph. Isn't that great?
With no context as well, I think that's
with
the problem.
None,
it's
zero
like,
context.
If you're going to do theory, I mean, I have mixed opinions about theory that maybe change every day, but like, if you're going to do it, it's better if they've looked at that evidence first and the problem and been like, oh shit, people disagree about this. Then they'll go into learning that graph, like maybe this will help the problem that needs to be solved, rather than here's a graph and this is economics and we use graphs, so therefore learn the graph, right?
Yes, exactly. And I think it creates this very regimented and rigid way of thinking about the real world. For instance, and I've told this story on Twitter, and I think I've told this story to you before. I remember I was filling in for a colleague who was teaching labor economics, and it happened to be my night. It was an evening course, and it happened to be the course that I was giving the lecture on was imperfect competition in labor markets. And I remember, so we did sort of the basic Alan Manning monopsony in motion theoretical layout for an imperfectly competitive labor market where a minimum wage actually increases the quantity of labor supplied instead of decreases it. And I could see the students weren't quite connecting with the graph. So I did another example where I said, okay, well, let's look outside of labor markets. Let's look at rent control, right? Let's look at the effect on rent control in an imperfectly competitive housing market. And I had students get actually distraught, like angry, when I showed on the graph that when in imperfectly competitive labor markets, rent control actually increases the quantity of housing supply. And which, again, this is not, I'm not giving any survey of the literature. I'm not putting anything in context. This is literally a graph on the board, and they were furious. They stayed after class to argue with me for the next 30 minutes, which I secretly loved, because that's gold. Like I love those kinds of interactions with students, even when we disagree. But lost their ever-loving minds over a graph that was straight from their textbook. If they bothered looking in their textbook, they would see it. It creates this weird regimented thinking that I don't think does anyone any favors.
Yeah, I mean, this is a pretty contentious issue. I mean, I guess it would be easy to get sidetracked into this, but I'm going to do it. Streams are all about getting sidetracked anyway,
Of course,
it's not a news channel. So I did a video called "The Death of Economics 101," which you might have seen. Yeah.
I enjoyed that one. Yeah.
Now I've done videos on race.
Mm-hmm.
I've done a video on Steven Pinker. Global poverty. I've done videos on that were direct responses to people that criticize people in BreadTube. None sparked reactions quite like that Death of Economics 101 video, right? Because I don't know what it is. Now, this is partly to do with economists themselves. It's partly to do with how the media and journalists and perhaps public intellectuals treat economics, right? This idea of Econ 101, and you're right, it's so regimented, right? And it's like, this is economics. And I think you can easily link it to some of the attitudes within the profession, right? Like about how, how great economics is and how it provides you with all these counterintuitive, policy conclusions, and like, oh, you thought the minimum wage was good, but actually it's bad. Actually, it hurts people, right? And it astonished me how many people got really annoyed at me essentially saying, and this is the long and short of the video, right? The first introductory model you learn in economics is not that great a guide to policy. In the first it's like saying, With the usual caveats about the analogy to physics, it's like saying, "Oh, did you know that planes actually have friction?" And when you learn about rolling the ball down the plane without friction, that's wrong. It's like, honestly, from a sort of scientific standpoint, the point made in that video is like indisputable, right? I think you can't approach everything with the most basic supply and demand model that we have, and yet economists themselves, and I think James Buchanan had some particularly choice
Oh
comments
God.
about the minimum wage, which were also
Yes.
sexist, by the way,
Yeah,
because
quite.
it all comes
Yes.
together, as we've been saying, it all comes together. But also outside the profession, right, and the way people use economics is way too rigid and doctrinaire.
Completely 100% agree. And it mischaracterizes the whole point of having theoretical models to begin with. I am unironically pro model, and here's why. Models are useful tools of rhetorical discipline. You back yourself into a rhetorical corner where you lay out your definitions. You're very explicit about them. You are explicit about the way, not necessarily in the way that the true laws of motion in an economy work, but the ways you think they do. And you set up a context that generates a testable prediction. And then you test that testable prediction and see if it holds up. That's not happening. The model is constructed and then said, oh, well, axiomatically it follows, therefore it must be true.
And this is especially true of like undergraduate economics, right, as well.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. So one of the things that I always do with my undergraduates when we start talking about these sort of controversial topics, and we'll do like a jigsaw literature review, is I say, think about the model that I taught you 2 weeks ago about competitive labor markets. Based on this data, based on what you see in these research papers, do you think that model is a good model for the way that the labor market really works, or a not great model for the way the labor market really works? And inevitably, I always get it's not a great model. I ask them to tell me why specifically they don't think it's a great model. What are the shortcomings? And then my pitch to them is, if this interests you and you want to learn more about it, come take my labor econ course, or maybe do grad school for economics if you're really interested in this and you think it's what you want to do for a career. I can't tell you how many times I've taken a student aside and been like, hey, you're doing really well in this class. You ask really interesting questions. Have you ever thought about grad school? I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten back from students who are like, even though I'm not interested in doing grad school for economics, no professor in any class I've ever taken has asked me if that's something that I'm interested in. I just wanted to tell you that it really meant a lot to me that you noticed or cared. Like, this goes back to being a great way to like both affirm your students and affirm the things that they're interested in. It's really hard to do that when all you're teaching and all you're throwing up on the board are these like regimented theories of the world based on like super restrictive and simplified assumptions that they don't get to engage with, they don't get to interrogate.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. Just, critically engaging students, right, with what we do as economists, I think is so important, and it fosters that critical mindset, which hopefully, I mean, we might have to wait a while, but hopefully will filter through, right? Because I mean, somebody said this in chat earlier, right? The economists of today were taught by the economists of yesterday, and the economists of yesterday may have been even worse. I'm not sure. I mean, there are lots of stories about the University of Chicago, for example, and perhaps people like Milton Friedman and George Stigler, where they were pretty doctrinaire, right, and maybe a bit ruthless. And so we get that filtering through, right, and people just, people do follow the lead their teachers and their role models, and if they've been taught firstly in an uncritical way, and secondly, in an unsympathetic way, I guess you could say, then they're gonna come out the same on the other end. So really, if we're talking about the toxic culture of the economics discipline, extinguish it at the source by teaching your students in a certain way, which also includes, being nice and affirming to them, right?
100%. And hopefully this will inspire you a little bit as well. I'm going to throw up in chat a link to a paper from my colleague Panka Bincic at University of Chicago, who this is perhaps the best example I have ever seen of being a practitioner and a scholar at the same time. Panka helped design and evaluate a program to decrease recidivism among users of hard drugs by filtering them away from prison and toward treatment. So basically, the idea is, and I won't spoil the paper too much because it's really, really good. Folks should read it. If folks in Chicago who were, arrested either on hard drug charges or for an unrelated charge, and then were found to have in their possession hard drugs below a certain non-felony amount, they're filtered away from the criminal justice system and filtered into treatment. And perhaps unsurprisingly, dramatically reduces recidivism and future incarceration among these people. And in addition to being a well-designed economic experiment, it was a thoughtfully crafted policy that she helped be a part of its creation, and it's being done at the University of Chicago. So I think this is maybe a sample size of n equals 1, but maybe things are changing. I'm really hopeful that things are changing.
I feel that they are, and I think economics Twitter is, which you're a member of, and which I'm a
member of as well.
A tentative member of.
Yeah, no, you're a member as well.
I still like to throw something out that they don't like every so often, but I am, and it's much better.
Gotta keep things spicy.
Yeah, exactly. No, so economics Twitter, if you compare it with EJMR, right, you've got a bunch of people who are basically, being supportive, giving each other information, giving them feedback, and being kind of honest, but not in a horrible, brutally honest way. Honest in a vulnerable way, right? You get that. You get that. And it was interesting to watch that emerge on Econ Twitter. This person, I didn't get any job offers. I'm going to leave academia. My paper's been rejected 5 times. You get quite a lot of that on Econ Twitter, don't you? And it's yes, let's just admit to each other and ourselves that this is extremely difficult. And unless you are literally Darren Asimoglu, I think honestly, I think everybody has, and probably Darren Asimoglu as well has. I'm sure he's had some bad experiences along the way, of rejections and stuff, right? So
yes. Yeah, well, so you get this, you get a kind of survivorship bias, don't you? Absent of something like economics Twitter, the only people who survive the difficulties of econ, and they are quite difficult. Not everyone has an extremely supportive department that they work for. Not everyone has the benefit of having a research network. So maybe this is by virtue of the field being quite small, but I know almost everyone who does queer economics research by name, by face, and I could give you a summary of the kind of work that they do. We email each other, we send each other papers for feedback. Not everybody has that kind of stuff, and I have that kind of stuff because of Econ Twitter.
Yeah.
Really, really cannot emphasize enough how much Econ Twitter has changed the game, especially especially when it comes to the causal inference methods that you were talking about earlier. And I think Scott Cunningham, professor of economics at Baylor University, deserves a lot of the credit for that, because sort of through his efforts on Twitter, a lot of people really became interested in something that you brought up earlier, being unconvinced of commonly used statistical techniques. Scott knew someone who had worked out an econometric model that said, hey, maybe this research design called difference in differences or two-way fixed effects, which is ubiquitous in econ right now.
It's the primary method in the minimum wage research, just to give people context, right?
Yeah.
Minimum wage implemented in one state, not in an adjacent state. Let's compare them. Is the basic intuition, right?
Yes, exactly. So it is ubiquitous in econ. And it turns out that that there are certain conditions under which the standard model that we use econometrically just doesn't work. It doesn't do what we think it does. There's bias that we didn't account for. And this would have taken a decade to disseminate into the field prior to econ Twitter. It took less than a year because of econ Twitter. And now we have 15 different methods. Depending on the context of your research question, there are like 15 different methods of doing difference in differences or two-way fixed effects that will fix those problems. And we wouldn't have had that without econ Twitter. It's a democratization of professional development for economics.
Yeah, that's a really great way of putting it. I think it allows people who are outside the networks that we were talking about before, right, to follow, the big ideas, right, and engage with people and directly, it's Twitter, right, so you can ask someone a question if they're about their paper.
Get an immediate response.
Get a response instead of firing an email off into the ether, a kind of top researcher, which doesn't necessarily work as well. Yeah, absolutely. I do think it's econ Twitter and there are other places. There's like an academic economics Discord, which is pretty good. It's pretty good. It's good for students as well. There's lots of stuff for students on there. I follow it a little bit. So I think there are some positives. I don't know how long it's going to take to change, though. I'm not sure.
It is changing. It is changing. And I remember I used to get so frustrated with you because it seems like you couldn't see how it was changing. But as time went on, even though it is changing, there are parts, and you were right to point this out, and it's still true, even though it is changing, there are parts that are slow and resistant to change, especially when it comes to some of the more hot button topics like Black Lives Matter, critical race theory, this like don't say gay / trans kids stuff that's happening right now. It's not that people aren't on the right side of this stuff. They're just unwilling or unable, they feel, to discuss it. And I think the reticence of econ compared to other disciplines in the social sciences and in the humanities to engage with these kinds of topics and be unapologetic about these kinds of topics will continue in the future to limit our recruitment of quality Black and brown students, students who are women, and students who are LGBTQ. I was, for instance, I was mentioning being at this conference this past week. People didn't even know queer econ was a thing, and indeed thought economics would be hostile to queer focused research. So, things are changing. It's good. Things could be changing a little more quickly. in my
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah. I think that there is still the old guard, right? I think you can see that quite clearly. I mean, one of the things I went over in my video was the Journal of Political Economy email exchange, right? So for some background, again, people who haven't watched the video, they're a top economics journal, very top Journal of Political Economy, Chicago-based. Uh, Somebody named Kenneth Judd trying to get published there, and he was kind of his paper was rejected, kind of eventually by James Heckman and
Hmm.
Harold Uhlig and Monica something, the editors at the JPE,
Right.
and for some reason Judd published a very bitter email exchange that he had with the editors after or during the process of rejection, I should say, where he kind of demanded they look at his paper again and again. And there were, I mean, I don't know what you make of the exchange. I think when I first read it, I thought, oh God, the JPE's at it again. Heckman's a dick. Uhlig's a dick. And then when I read it again and again, and I was like, actually, I think Kenneth Judd might be more the bad guy here than anyone else. Why has he published this
Yeah.
on his website? It was juvenile. Like, we're talking about toxic culture in economics, right? This was juvenile. And these are top researchers, right?
Hmm.
It's like a bunch of fucking teenagers. Like, I don't know. It's just I don't know. I'm lost for words, Ben. Help me.
It is one of the most cringe experiences I've ever had as an economist reading that exchange. It's like someone it's like someone taking a shit on the floor and drawing attention to it as if they're proud of it. It's like, isn't it unfair how these people don't appreciate the aesthetics of this shit I took on the floor in their house? It's like, yeah, but it's like a literal pile of shit on the floor. And then like there was publishing the exchanges. It was just like smearing it around and finger painting with it. It was so awkward and super cringe. And I don't think anyone looked good. I thought Judd thought he would look like some kind of oppressed, soldier,
Judd, the Stanford
shake,
professor.
yeah,
Yeah.
shaking his fist at the economics establishment. And I thought Heckman and Uhlig thought that they would look like people who didn't have their fingers on the strings pulling them.
Yeah,
Everybody looked bad.
yeah. It's worth saying for Judd's comments, they were certainly more comprehensive and more aggressive. But there is a context, right? Isn't there? Because he's not the one with the power, right? He's the one
Oh,
being
and
rejected from
exactly.
a top journal on grounds that I actually think, if you go down to the technical reason, I actually think are pretty unfair for the record.
Agreed. And I will also say that I was horrified, completely horrified by what I perceive to be mutual threats against each other's students.
Yes.
That is reprehensible. Reprehensible. So for context for folks who didn't see the video or aren't familiar with the context, is this sort of back and forth drama got so intense that these researchers were basically saying, you know what, look, I've co-authored this paper with my PhD students. This decision is hurting my students. You've got students too, and I've got power, and I can hurt them.
Yeah.
And then there was sort of this tete-a-tete that was back. It was like, well, I can hurt your students worse kind of thing, which was having beef with someone in a field is common. There's someone in my subfield that I have beef with that I think their method isn't super great, but I would never, ever let that extend to my treatment of their students. That's a bridge too far and is
I
extremely
can't
toxic.
imagine it. It wouldn't. I don't think of myself as like, the best, most moral person in the world, but it wouldn't even enter into my head to threaten someone's students. Do you know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
It's not even on in the choice set, an economist would say, right? I wouldn't be like,
Right,
oh, you know
yeah,
what I'm going to do? You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to threaten your students. Like, it makes no sense to me. It wouldn't even enter into it. It was just an awful exchange, and that's apparently what happens at the top economics journals. So it's all merit, it's all a meritocracy, you know. No, it is children bickering. Also, massive shout out to Big Joel and SDL for reading those out. It, they did a very good job.
Very well
considering
acted.
that they didn't actually know anything about the context as well. Like, I mean, Big Joel had comparatively more to read out, and he doesn't necessarily know anything about the economics profession, but he captured the emotions very, very well, right?
Someone in chat, Black Box, said, "I can't believe academics can cause this much drama." When the stakes are this low,
yeah.
when the stakes are this low, the only kind of drama you can have is the most vociferous, like soap opera, weird drama that you can even imagine. It's crazy. You should see conferences sometimes where there is pre-existing drama. It can be quite fun to watch if you have a little popcorn.
It's actually astonishing. Yeah, if you remove yourself from it, it's pretty funny. But when you're kind of dependent on the same profession it's happening in for like your employment and your ability to teach and research and things like that, it sometimes becomes less funny, and you're like, okay, right, this is actually what I have to deal with.
Yes, I have a colleague of mine who I won't name. When they were doing their Viva, and they were in the UK. When they were doing their Viva, they were bringing together sort of two streams of research, and one person on their committee was on one side, and the other person on their committee was on the other side. And their Viva lasted, I think, 3 hours, because there was just a very long argument between those two people, to the extent that was so bad they thought they were going to fail their Viva.
Oh my God.
Because one of the people was like refusing to sign off on a result because it was too supportive of the other stream of literature. So yeah, when the stakes are so low, I think the drama must necessarily.
I actually, that's amazing that I actually have a very similar story which will not be the same story because we're in different countries. Yeah, like a PhD student had their Viva, and their external and their internal, because I don't know how you do it in the States. We only have two, external and internal. Their external and their internal were had a falling out at a conference previously.
Oh no!
And so they just relitigated the dispute throughout the Viva, and the students just like, what the hell am I doing here? You know what I mean? It's just like, grow up, like. I don't know, we need training not just in teaching but in like emotional intelligence and things like that. Like, how do I manage my own emotions and not be a prissy dickhead all the time?
Yeah, I remember sitting in a field course where one of the papers we had to review for this field course, I mean, it was seminal in the field. We could not get away from it. But it was published by one of the arch nemesis of the professor. And we spent, it was like an hour-long course. We spent 30 minutes discussing the paper and 30 minutes discussing why my professor hated this guy so much. So I know lots of internal drama about the interrelationship between these two people that I don't care to know. I really don't. I just don't care. I just don't care, but it's very important to them. And we had a roundabout question on the exam about it. But it was framed in like, but what is the fundamental limitation of the approach, within, this paper by so-and-so et al. And the fundamental flaw, of course, required us to cite the feud.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's, speaking of exam questions, what about the oh god, now I've forgotten his name, that Chicago one, is it Alan Sanderson, the Chicago one about price controls and Bernie that surfaced on Twitter a while ago? I put that in my credits in the video because it surfaced after I'd written the script, but it was something along the lines of Bernie's favorite economist said that we should use price control. Bernie's favorite economist at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, LRM, by the way, is implicit in there, right? Low rate. Said we should use price controls to control inflation. How would a real economist respond? Pitched in a real exam at Chicago by Alan Sanderson, I think, to students, to undergrad. It's an actual exam. You get 2 marks for answering that. Like,
here's an actual economist responding. Right now, right here. This is how an actual economist responds.
Absolutely. I can't remember. I think the person who it was, I forget her name, but she's on Twitter, and she changed her Twitter name to Not a Real Economist for a while because it was her comments that it was about, which I thought was quite a good move.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Yes, but so it's just like this kind of conceit, right? Isn't it? Like, there's one way of doing economics. We do it. We're better than the heterodox economists. We're better than the sociologists, and and the guy who wrote it again has a reputation as being a bit of a sex pest. So there you go. I just like I keep saying. I don't know if I've said it too many times. One lesson from teaching I learned is you can actually never say something too many times. You think you've said it too many times, but you can always say it again. Yeah, it all comes together, right? It's like this kind of arrogance, lack of interdisciplinarity, kind of closed-mindedness, bitterness, competitiveness, lack of diversity, right? All these things, they seem to come together.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to emphasize, in appealing to, I guess, the fundamental attribution error on this is not something that is unique to economists. This is something that's unique to the institution of professional economics. This is not one bad apple spoils the whole bunch. This is a bad barrel spoiling the apples. And the reason, the sort of the intuition I give for this when I talk about this with people is to consider someone like Milton Friedman, who I think consequentially harmed more people than any economist who has ever lived. Whose policy recommendations have harmed.
Lose your neoliberal credentials.
I am. They're gonna kick me out for that.
You've got the blue globe on your name, haven't you?
No. I took that out.
Oh, okay.
I took that out a long time ago. Yeah, I made a post appealing to the neoliberals to please just consider Liz Warren, and I got excommunicated for that. But no. So the thing with Milton Friedman, yes, consequentially he hurt a ton of people, but also when Deirdre McCloskey, who's the first transgender economist to ever publicly come out, after being a very high-profile economist pre-transition, very publicly came out in late 80s, early 90s, and was treated horrifically by both the profession and her former colleagues, except Milton Friedman, who both wrote her a very supportive, very kind note, and would be careful to bring her into parties and introduce her using her correct pronouns, her correct name, and introduce her as Deirdre McCloskey. So there's a fundamental decency. You don't. It's easy to think of someone like Milton Friedman as a cartoon character or comic book villain, but there is a real decency in him as a person, that the context that he put himself in and the ideological context, especially the ideological context he put himself in, yielded a lot of harm. And I think that's true for a lot of economists. There are a lot of economists who are, at the end of the day, decent, if a little problematic, but that's not a big deal. We can work with people on that. Decent, if not a little problematic, who the context of the economics profession makes them behave in ways they would not normally do absent that context. So that is one reason I think we have to change so much, because the great tragedy of the way we do economics now is that it can make good people into bad people or do bad things.
Yeah. That's again extremely well put. And to be honest, I think it's probably a reasonable place to finish the stream. We've been chatting for 2 hours. It's been
doesn't feel that long.
I know. Honestly, it's a lot. It's been a lot of fun. As you know, one of the few economists with social skills, I said to Ben before we went live. I said I didn't have too much of a plan for this because I know that he can actually speak to people, so I didn't have to have a long list of questions, and that's exactly how I went. So yeah, this has been really great. I mean, a couple of things. One, is there anything that you wanted to say that we missed out? And two, where can people find you and your work?
Sure. You can find me on Twitter. I am at LBen. I'm going to put it in the chat at LBen. And you can view my work such as it is. I've not updated it in a while on my website, benharrellecon.com. Especially be looking out in the coming months. I have some work I'm really excited about under review about domestic partner benefits and same-sex marriage, public health insurance expansions and queer health, public health insurance expansions and STI incidents and prevention. So, and I have an experiment out in the field right now looking at discrimination against transgender people and access to mental health care that I've been working on for a couple of years, and we're entering into the big push of data collection. I'm so excited about that. Really important, impactful work. So cool things are coming down the pipeline.
Excellent.
So follow me on social media and keep up with it.
That all sounds really exciting. People in the chat are saying you talked about a paper earlier that I don't think got sent.
What paper was that? Let's see.
What paper was it?
Drug policy was the.
What paper was it, everybody?
Yeah, Dolphin Expert. You were the person who brought it up. I'm sorry I missed the mention. Anyone have a link to the drug policy paper? It is forthcoming in the journal. Oh, I don't know if you knew this. Doliak's paper is getting published in the Journal of Law and Economics. It's forthcoming.
Oh, is it? Oh, the harm reduction one. Oh, okay. There'll be another wave of outrage about that again. Because, it was a Brookings Institute paper, wasn't it?
Oh, God, no. The links that I've been posting in the YouTube chat, I don't
think they don't go through. Of course, no, that's my fault for not realizing that. I have links disabled. Maybe I should stop doing that. It's just because of spam, really. But
sure,
let me give Ben will post it to me, and I will post it on the description of this video, everyone.
Sure.
And I can tweet it as well. So, I'll do that, basically as soon as we finish, everyone.
Yes.
You just send it to me on Zoom or whatever.
I will. Yeah. So I see which one they were asking for now. It was Punka Benzik's one from University of Chicago. The crime, the drug paper. So I can.
Right.
I'm gonna put that in the chat, and you can link it.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Of course.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Ben, and thanks everybody. We've been averaging about 200 viewers, by the way, for the record.
Oh, nice. Very cool.
There's been very good viewer retention. It's gone up and it hasn't gone back down again, which is pretty impressive. So I think it is because you're a very interesting person to speak to. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate that.
Okay. See you later, everybody. I'm going to...
Bye, everyone. Thanks for having me.